Hey everybody, welcome. This is our Economic Action Team weekly podcast, Talk with Wayne. Uh, Wayne will be joining us shortly. Those of you who are here, welcome. Thanks a lot for being here. We're going to get started here in a minute. And let's see. Wayne is going to join by phone. Uh, he's got a he had an emergency with his dog, but I think it's been taken care of. So he'll be here any moment right now. So just hold on tight, everybody. And those of you who are listening, if you are on Facebook or YouTube, go ahead and click that. Go ahead and like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube channel on Facebook, and you can interact on our YouTube or Facebook chat. So anyhow, we're just waiting for Wayne to join. And I see a bunch of you out there already. So, welcome once again to the Economic Action Team weekly podcast, Talk with Wayne. If you have any questions, um, type your questions into the chat box here. Below, you'll see a chat box where you can type in your questions, or if you would like to come on live, you can unmute yourself. Just raise your hand, we'll unmute you, and you can ask your questions directly to Dr. Wayne Dorban. So anyway, we will give it a couple of minutes and we'll get started. Type in where you at in the world. So if you're new to this, also let us know. If this is your first time on this webinar, we'd like to know where you at and what your interests, goals, what are your goals and interests are, and so on and so forth. We can discuss. So anyway, looks like Wayne is on with his audio. Yes, he is on with audio and video. So how are you, Wayne? I'm
I'm
not
good,
hearing it.
Mark.
Hey, okay.
I'm much better than I was about an hour ago. I had lost a couple of my dogs and was
Oh
not
no.
having. Just a second. I've got to do something. It should be. I should have a. Should be.
Yeah, you're
Do you
fine
hear me
now.
now?
Yes, it's
Do you hear
fine.
me now?
Yes,
Do you hear me now?
yes, it's fine.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
All
Okay.
right. Well, Uh, you hear me now?
Yes, it's fine
Do
now.
you guys
Now.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Um, So I'm going to make this brief today. Let's start with you guys getting questions in. We're going to deal with those first. Lots to talk about, but just way too busy today. And I just lost a couple of dogs that um, I did find, but was in a panic mode. Told Fareed earlier and Bob Christador to tell Mark I wouldn't be able to be on the call. And so Mark's, I'm sure, got a video replay that's queued up, and we'll talk for 10, 15 minutes here, and then Mark will go to the video replay. All right, questions. If you have them, put them in now, because we're going to get to them right now. And I have nothing else that new that we're going to talk about. I have all kinds of things, including, boy, if you're out there in the world right now and looking for people to do environmental work, there's no better time. I had over 100 people apply to get one job, and never seen it like that ever in my 50 years of doing this in the environmental field. For whatever reason, there's an awful lot of people available that want jobs. But anyway, that's a whole broad topic to talk about with some and many of them very qualified. So, Mark, do you see questions?
I don't see questions yet.
Okay.
But We are still waiting. I see new people, so if this is the first time for you guys, type in
Yeah,
what you yeah.
just tell us a little bit about where you're from and what brought you and what kinds of things you're interested in. Just real simple. I know most people that call in are very shy, and so don't worry about it. We won't embarrass you. We won't make you come on and talk or do anything like that. But let your fingers do a little bit of talking and tell us a little bit about you. This is Wayne, and I am calling from the Boise, Idaho area. I'm actually sitting in the parking lot of a driving range for a golf course right now, just because that was the closest place to get off. I had been out doing things with my dogs, training, and had been picking some things up at a auction that we had bought some things from last night, and then was driving back to be doing this from my office and didn't make it because of having to find these two dogs that were off and about. And these are competition dogs. They do what are called field trials. They're young and they can run their legs off. But today they were running too much running and too little listening. But fortunately, it was so cool for the number of people that I ran into that were willing to help look for them. People are, you know, I don't let anybody tell me that the world's full of really bad people. There might be some out there, but most people are amazingly good and they'll help and they care. Um, they'll be on your side if you just let them. So anyway, again, I am in the Boise, Idaho area. It is a very nice spring, early spring. Is it today the first day of spring or the second day? It's one of those. I think it's the first. And it is a early spring day and uh, partly cloudy, high in the or temperature right now in the high 50s. And, a little breeze, but not bad. And, um, snow on the mountains around us, all around. That's always nice. You can look up and see snow rather than being in it. Yesterday and the day before, I was traveling towards the east. I went from here to Chicago and from Chicago to Pittsburgh and from Pittsburgh to Youngstown, Ohio, and from Youngstown to back to Pittsburgh and then Pittsburgh to Denver and then Denver here to Boise, all in less than 48 hours, 36 hours or so. So lots of being in planes and looking at environmentally contaminated sites. Looked at a site in two different sites in the Youngstown, Ohio area that have been historic for 70 plus years, manufacturing different types of things for the steel industry, rail car doors, all kinds of metal beams and structures for different kinds of metal support, very large. Also, a company that makes sheds on the other end of the spectrum. You know, the kinds of things that you put in your backyard or put on a business somewhere, and literally can build a shed about one an hour, and pretty cool, pretty fast. Just saw there was a text that came from someone here. I don't know whether that was someone trying to call in or be on this call today. Actually, it was somebody getting back to me about the dog they found, which was one of mine, and they were being helpful about it. So that was very cool. Um, I'm going to open up the questions real quick and comments and see whether there's some new folks that have got some thoughts and questions. Got an otter out there. Everybody, if you
Yeah,
haven't heard about Otter, you should maybe check it out. It's essentially an AI note taker. We've got them now for our staff. Mark uses his. I have mine. I don't know why neither one of ours is on this one today, Mark. Um,
right.
I didn't really program mine, and I knew there'd be notes being taken by Mark,
Yeah.
and we record this and we edit it, so I really wasn't worried. But the Otter will go on and it'll listen to the entire discussion. They use enough AI to know what points that as you talked in the conversation of the meeting or whatever the call was you were on, what things you committed to do. And so it gives you a list of things that you've said that you'd work on. It also does a transcript for the entire meeting. It gives screenshots of a lot of the documents that were talked about. Um, it's something we used to spend hours trying to duplicate and to do. And now you don't spend any time. The Otter does it for you. There's probably other competitors out there. I just haven't used them. So environmental topics, a big deal for the week is um, there's been a whole rash of ridiculous kinds of activities, people burning up, defacing electric vehicles, Teslas, in in their lots and out on the road and out on the street, just horrible things. Because the whoever is doing it is, I guess, upset with Elon Musk and with Tesla because of um, his involvement with different things related to the U.S. government now. So you know, why people can't just go protest, go stand on top of a billboard for days or whatever, do something to get all the attention, but don't be defacing private property because it's not, you know, they're not Musks, they're the dealerships or they're individuals. You're not hurting Elon Musk at all. So if you think what you're doing is something that's gonna, you know, hurt him, it probably isn't. Even though you shouldn't be trying to hurt anybody at all. So again, I talked about my experience this week with hiring environmental people, really greatly well qualified. We ended up hiring three actually to replace three others, one full time and two part time. Cameron Kettler is now going to be our new full-time person that's going to be replacing Teresa. And Ashton Stumpf is going to be part-time, and Elora Mantle is going to be part-time also. Incredibly well qualified. And I had fun yesterday and spending time with Ashton and Cameron in Austintown. And we were looking at this site that one of our clients is buying. So what else, Mark? What else can you think of that we should talk about here? We're getting any questions?
Don't see questions yet.
I switched from my truck speaker to my phone speaker, which is actually better than the truck speaker, I think.
Mm.
Both my microphone and the speaker that I'm hearing from.
Yeah, we could play the video if you want.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Why don't we go
Okay.
ahead and do a radio? Mark, there was a good chance I wasn't going to even be able to be on here at all, but I was
Yeah.
able to get on. But let's go ahead and let Mark play that video. It's a
Right.
replay that I'm sure you guys will enjoy. Which one did you choose, Mark?
It's backyard paradise. Someone called Byron Briss. So we interviewed him last year, I think, or before that. If you remember that.
Okay.
If I play, you might remember him because you interviewed him. So
All right. Well, that's awesome. Well, anyway, we'll we'll talk to everybody next week, or if you have questions, you can put them in, and Mark and I will get back to them. But let's
okay.
watch the replay.
All right.
Hey, everybody, sorry I'm late. I
Oh, hey, Wayne.
had a little trouble getting on the internet here today. Apologize.
Yeah,
How
it
you doing,
happens.
Byron?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. How about yourself? It's Thursday, almost the middle of the day for me, so it's probably not quite that late in the week for you.
It is Wednesday, 5 o'clock. So
Yeah. 'Cause you're
and
Colorado Mountain Time, right?
I am in the Colorado Mountains. Yeah. And what
Yeah,
what
beautiful.
part of New Zealand are you in? I know you're in New Zealand.
I'm in the North Island, which is the Bay of Plenty. So if you're looking at it kind of zoomed out on a map, it's the big bay kind of at the top of the North Island.
You ever
Yeah,
heard of
it's
a
kind of,
fellow named Zebulon Harrell? That name ring a bell?
say it one more time.
Zeb, his full name is Zebulon, but Zeb Harrell.
No, I don't think I had. That's a pretty unique name, so I would have remembered it, but I don't think I've heard of him.
He is becoming the Joel Salatin of New Zealand. So,
Really?
yeah, he's an amazing guy. We did a webinar together, but he's also become a very close friend. And Joel, this is Joel's words of him becoming the Joel Salatin of New Zealand, not his, not mine. Joel, I introduced him to Joel, and he had a chance to spend a number of times with him. I'll figure out how to get you together. And he's silent. I'm just not sure exactly where.
Yeah, that'd be so amazing to touch base.
Well, I'm sorry again, I'm late, but I think we're going to do just kind of an interview here today. I want to do a little logistics first. I know Mark might have done some of this, but for all of our attendees, it will be a lot of fun if you guys ask questions, because my questions will be all right, but yours are great. So please ask some questions. Mark will be looking at them. I probably won't, because I want to focus on my conversation with Byron. And but Mark, if you see some questions that fit in, interrupt us, and we'll get to them, and then we'll do some question and answer at the end also.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I speculated. I spent quite a bit of time yesterday on your Instagram page, your Facebook page, and your website. And you know, this would just happen. So I use a landline to connect by audio because I'm on a satellite system, and there's a delay about almost a second. And if I use the audio on the computer, it buffers it, but it's just a little weird. But I've been on calls all day. This phone is going dead, and it's real easy to switch it, but I got to go in the other room to switch it. I'm going to do that real quick, and I'll be right back. I'll stay on the phone. You guys are just going to see my webcam blank for a minute. But anyway, I visited all of your kind of web presence. It was a lot of fun. But here's what I didn't pick up, and Arib gave it to me earlier, which was your last name, which I think is Briss. Am I pronouncing it right? Is that correct?
No, you've swapped the R and the I. It's Bierce.
Bierce. Well, Arib is amazing English from learning early just by listening to things on Radio America and so on. But sometimes he doesn't get things exactly right. So, Bierce. And then, are you a native New Zealander, or did you come there? I heard on a video that I watched that you kind of gave up your job and a number of other things not that long ago, but I'm not sure where you were physically before that.
Yeah, no. So it's I'm not a native New Zealander. It's the accent, you can probably tell. I'm from the West Coast, over in Oregon.
Okay.
And I only actually moved out here about 3 years ago to New Zealand. So I was just talking with Mike, I think, before about how lucky that timing was, just like right before COVID, and a lot of stuff happened where it's like now it's incredibly difficult to get into the country. So really lucked out in that respect.
Yeah, I was going to say, it couldn't have been super easy even 3 years ago, correct? How long did you go through
sort of the visa process? And are you now, can you stay as long as you choose, or what's the status?
Yep. So I'm a permanent resident, and I'll be honest with you, Wayne, it was actually super easy for me because I came in on the coattails of my parents. My mom was able to get a job here, and at the time, I kind of came in alongside them as a dependent, and so that made the whole process way easier than if I had decided to just on my own, tried to come here and become a resident.
Got it. Well, you probably notice I have a similar generic English dialect as you do. I'm from Southern California. I think West Coasters sort of all sound somewhat the same because we all have fairly near relatives that weren't from here. And so they are not where I'm at now. Even Colorado fits into that, I think, but certainly Southern California does. I have a daughter and son-in-law who are in Corvallis, and just moved there last June, so I haven't gotten to visit them yet, mainly because of the pandemic. But so what part of Oregon were you at?
All around Oregon, and to be honest, I have family in Corvallis, so that's great. Is she going to school? Is she going to OSU?
No, she's her husband is an IT guy, and he is a partner in a relatively new firm that's putting wireless internet throughout the region outside of Corvallis. So they actually live in Philomath, which, as you probably know, is just a little suburb just to the east, to the west. And she's a starving artist, and actually does have a job. She writes and is an editor too, but really likes to paint and to weave and to spin and to draw and sculpt and all those sorts of things. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, there's so much opportunity for those kind of things, especially in Oregon. It's just a really beautiful place. Corvallis particularly, though.
And is the weather a little bit similar where you're at in terms of rainfall and temperature?
Yeah, it's just a slight bit warmer. I mean, I came from a variety of places in Oregon. I lived on the coast. I lived up in the Willamette Valley, and I lived down in Southern Oregon, just in Ashland. And so there's a range of weather on the West Coast, but as a whole, it's just warmer here. We don't really get snow at all where we are. The days are just much more what it feels like is winter just kind of doesn't really happen. It goes spring, summer, fall, and then it just kind of bleeds back into spring.
That almost sounds San Francisco Bay-ish, or maybe even LA-ish. I mean, it's so.
Yeah. Kind of that Mediterranean climate where, you do have the humid and the hot, relatively dry summers, and then the mild winters. It's a great place though. And it's interesting too because the culture isn't that big of a shock either. So like climate, not a big shock. It's slightly Americanized here. And so there wasn't a huge culture shock. Whereas if you'd gone elsewhere in the world, it could be quite a bit of an adjustment.
So tell us about your what spurred your passion for permaculture? Is that a childhood thing? There must have been something either that happened, at an instant or over a period of time. Tell us about that.
Well, it's kind of both. It's funny that you say that phrasing of like in an instant, but also over a span of time, because it happened in both ways. The first way, in an instant, I had never even heard of the word permaculture before until 2 years ago. I came across what that word was, and I was like, oh, what is this? I clicked what it means, read the definition, and it just clicked. I was like, oh, that's exactly it. That's what I want to be doing. But before that, it was this big lead up kind of from ever since I was really young, I was going to outdoor programs. I was doing Boy Scouts. I was teaching summer camps. I was doing all this stuff outdoors. I was going to outdoor school. I even went to university for environmental science. And so it felt like this whole, it was kind of being exposed to these kind of things without calling it permaculture or without putting a name to it or that kind of focus. But I was accumulating all these experiences throughout my life, and I'm still super young. I'm only 26, but I've been accumulating those kind of really rich outdoor, in touch with the environment and the ecosystems experiences since I was a little kid. And so then to be, 24 and, click the definition, what permaculture was, it just snapped it immediately. I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And so I was working in a different job at that point in time when I figured out, oh, that's what permaculture is. And I immediately knew, like, oh, that's what I want to be doing. I don't know how it's going to happen, but because what was so attractive about it to me was that it was so multidisciplinary, in the sense that you can, permaculture, as it's like really classically thought of as like companion planting and like gardening on steroids, but that's one approach, or that's one way that it's reflected. But really, it's such a multidisciplinary thing where you can apply that kind of framework to anything from like energy to building construction to art to creating these ecosystems, these gardens. Like, there's so many things that you can apply permaculture to. And that's what was almost so appealing about it, is like it wasn't this very narrowly defined like track of like, this is what that means when you do permaculture. And because of that, because of the freedom that it gives you to explore other things, within that realm that have an interest to me, like creating beautiful, and ecosystems and working towards restoration of the planet in a way that makes sense for people and like all the systems at play, that was really appealing to me. And it kind of gave a way forward. Whereas I just kind of come from graduating university, and I got into this job that was like the ideal job from getting that degree where they like train you to become this. And I got that job, and it was just not what I expected, maybe because, you go to school for environmental science, you want to like do great things for the planet. You want to like, you want to make things that are going to benefit a better future. And in a lot of ways, it didn't feel like that was at the core of the degree or the job that I was working. And so there was this disconnect between like what I really wanted out of, life, which is what I'm trying to do and why I went to school for that in the first place, and what was actually happening, which was, just going out and doing like routine monitoring stuff. And there was just this big disconnect. And so when I came across what permaculture was, it afforded an opportunity of like, oh wow, here's a way to get closer to kind of like realign with like what it is you actually give a shit about. And that was really exciting. And that's kind of like where that wormhole opened up, and I just began like, free falling into it pretty much.
Very cool. We'll get into a lot more of that detail in a few minutes. We've got a lot of similarities. Age, obviously, we're very close to the same age. Not really, but I had an instantaneous sort of revelation when I was in my basically junior high age time frame, and a lot of our listeners know what that is, and this isn't my webinar, so I'm not going to talk about that. But I also I took the other approach to the environmental sciences area. I could never picture doing what it sounds like you did, so I just formed my own firm when I was a graduate student, and I was never going to work for anybody else, and never have actually since. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to do projects that I enjoy. And in that case, in that time, it was cleaning up the remains of mining in the Pacific Northwest that had just destroyed forest ecosystems. And I was able to work for several of the governmental entities, cities, counties, and others that were in that process. But anyway, the bottom line is that that created curiosity. Where'd you go to school first? Where'd you do your college or your university education? And what was the environmental firm you went to work for? And just a tiny little more detail for me, and then I'll get a sense of your job.
Yeah, basically, I actually went to two schools for university. I went to a community college, which was great because it was pretty much free. And so instead of like paying outrageous amounts of money for the first 2 years of like general education, which are just the classic court, yeah. So did those for free at Chemeketa, that's in Salem, Oregon. And that was great because I didn't feel this pressure of like, oh shit, I'm spending $20,000 a year. I need to like be using that wisely. I felt like I could play around a little bit more. And so I was taking like all these psychology classes and art classes, pottery, and I was just like really enjoying myself without the financial burden of like, but I got to make like big decisions. It was really great. And so then in my last term of doing that, I took an environmental science course, which was just amazing because I remember we were always doing field trips, and we were always, I had this memory, this teacher took us out in canoes, and we were just out in the estuary taking water samples, and like there's bald eagles flying over, and it was just the best, man. It was so cool. Like we're in this amazing outdoor space, just like enjoying ourselves. And I felt really compelled after that to like, yeah, that's the direction that I want to go. I want to be having those kind of experiences. So then after the first 2 years, I went to Southern Oregon University out of Ashland, and I did their environmental science and biology program there. And I really enjoyed it. It was a great place to, you know, Ashland is such a unique place geographically because it's kind of at an intersection between a lot of different kinds of ecosystems. And so it affords a really cool opportunity. I remember I took a herpetology class, and basically like the study of reptiles and amphibians. And we spent a week, the whole class was like 10 or 15 people, and we spent a week in 2 buses traveling around a cross section of Oregon. And because the ecosystems of Oregon are kind of laid out vertically, right? You have like coastal mountains, higher mountains, and then you have desert all laid out vertically. If you do a cross section across them like that, you can span a great diversity of ecosystems in a very short period of time. And so we spent a week just traveling in a van, just like, you know, driving for an hour, jumping out, picking up some rocks, looking under them for some reptiles and snakes, and diving into the bushes and finding these really cool, and it was just a great like experience to be out in the field doing these things. And so going to school and exposing myself to a lot of those different kinds of environments and just those fulfilling things like being outdoors, getting in touch with the world and learning about it, that was super enjoyable. And so kind of like off the back of that, graduate, spend a year working at an outdoor school in Ashland, basically a whole year, because I had done a lot of summer camps. I'd been a counselor at like Boy Scout camps. I was a lifesaver or a lifeguard. I would teach like robotics classes to kids. I would do like really fun, enjoyable things for short periods of time over the summer. But then to do a year-long, basically a whole year of outdoor school where we would take these kids on backpacking trips. We would lead them on like weekend-long or whole week-long overnight camping trips. It was just really a nourishing experience. And so that was also part of it, is like education and bringing kids into it and making this an accessible thing for them. After that is when I moved to New Zealand, and I actually applied when I was still living in the States. I had my interview over Zoom, and then I arrived, pretty much got the job right away and started working pretty much near immediately once I moved here. And that was with local government, basically doing environmental monitoring, which is what I went to school for. It's kind of like what they train you. They like kind of like funnel you into that in a lot of ways, you know, and it's like the dream job. It was super cool. I was outside like 99% of the time, way out in the mountains, in the rivers. We would we'd take helicopters and fly out into the mountains to like calibrate environmental monitoring stations. And it was a really great job in that respect, that in so many ways it allowed me to come into New Zealand and really get grounded and not have this immediate financial pressure of like, oh crap, I've moved to this country, what am I going to do? It also got me in touch with the local geography, the local community, the climate, like just a great place to come and have some stability, basically is what I'm saying. And in that, it afforded me the ability, to purchase property here with my parents. And so that has been a big part in what's kind of allowed this to happen, because moving here and then buying a little piece of land almost was the impetus, like the thing that sparked that curiosity of like, oh, what can you do in your backyard that like creates these beautiful ecosystems that feed us? And that's kind of what led to me discovering what permaculture was, because this place has a bunch of fruit trees on it, and it was kind of like a neglected old orchard. And so after moving here to this property, I jumped on Google. Oh, that's it, actually, right there. That's when we first moved here. I was on Google. I was like, oh, how do you how do you like manage an orchard in an ecological way? How do you create an ecosystem out of an orchard? That's because to me, in my mind, that's what this is about. It's like restoring landscapes that integrate well with people. And I don't see classic orchards as being those ecosystems that are valuable to the planet, wildlife, and humans. And so that's kind of where my mind led. It was like, cool, how do you manage an orchard in an ecological way? And then permaculture pops up. It's like, okay, cool, that, and then that, and then that, and then you just kind of go down the rabbit hole. And then fast forward almost 2 years, and here we are.
So did you take a PDC, or who became a hero of yours in the permaculture world after you learned the word and you realized that, gosh, it's more than just gardening. It's a lifestyle. It's a way to
But I didn't know that first.
So
yeah, the first thing I did, I remember I figured it out. I learned what permaculture was. I read the definition. And that same evening, I looked up, cool, locally, what is there? What's around me that I can like learn from? And the closest thing to me was about an hour and a half away. So I called this woman. She had a course going already. I called her, and basically it's a year-long PDC. So a full year, basically you go there 1 weekend every month. And they were already 2 months into it. So I was kind of calling, basically saying like, hey, I'm really interested. I just found out about this. Can I join late? Is that all right? And she goes, yeah, absolutely. And then went up there, I think probably 2 weeks later, and just loved it, really enjoyed it, and had something to sink my teeth into, which was so great. Like having just discovered what this was, and then finding something that like really captivated me so much to just be able to like bite into. And then that led to meeting more people, being exposed to different things. So it was very much like in-person learning, but also so much back-end learning, like watching YouTube videos and reading books, and just kind of keep on consuming things that I found interesting, because that's part of it. Is I really just enjoy the learning process and following that curiosity. And so that's a lot of what this is about. It's kind of just following that learning edge of things that pique my interest, and how can I apply that to what I'm doing now.
So you got into your PDC with the lady. How about as you were doing that, did she talk about other people who had influenced her, and did that prompt you to do some reading or watch some YouTube videos, or do whatever to get learning? What are some names? I mean, you realize how close you are to Bill Holmgren compared to us here in the U.S. and to Mollison and to Jeff Lawton and Doherty and any number of those folks in Australia. But it's interesting, permaculture hadn't really ever caught on in New Zealand, not in any way like it did in Australia. It still hasn't today, I don't believe. But who
Permaculture
else?
in New Zealand, you
Some
mean?
other names.
Well, yeah, some specifics. The format of the PDC was actually really great, because it was never just Catherine, the woman who hosts these PDCs on her own. It was never just Catherine, and she runs Plenty Permaculture is who that is. They're based out of the Western Bay of Plenty, but she would never be alone. Basically, she would always bring somebody in kind of to co-host. So she'd bring people from all around to expose us to a variety of people with specific interests. Someday on one of the weeks, it was a woman named Kazel, and she does a lot with soil science. And then it was somebody else from a different part of New Zealand who focuses on water. And then it was a different person who focuses on design process. And so in that, I met people, more local to me and then extended, but that really enhances your network of who you're coming across and who you can, I'm really interested in water management, so I'm going to kind of closely follow what this person is doing over here. And for me, that ended up being really valuable, because one of the people that she brought on, who was actually a mentor of hers, his name is Dan Palmer, and he actually just lives right around the corner from us, just about 20 minutes away. And he has he has his own podcast, and he writes books, and he's basically got this whole community gathering around permaculture design process, and making that making that stronger. You might have heard of the podcast. It's called Making Permaculture Stronger. And it basically has this really big emphasis on design process rather than, just taking goodies from the permaculture grab bag and sprinkling them around in the landscape. Like, oh, you need a chicken tractor, and oh, you need a herb spiral, and you need this. Because to me, that's not permaculture. Permaculture isn't just taking like the trendy elements and just kind of like dropping them into a landscape and calling it permaculture. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how it can appear, especially like if you just Google permaculture garden, you'll see like herb spirals and you'll see all the really nice Pinterest photos. But to me, that almost doesn't honor the real potential and the real richness of what permaculture is and can be. And so what I love about what Dan's doing, and a lot of his work has informed the way that I'm beginning to operate, is it really honors that design process as being like almost the integral part of what can make permaculture such a practical thing. Yeah, and so I think that's been one of those really significant like mentor relationships. Mark Shepard, I've never met him, but I've communicated a little bit on Instagram with him, and I've watched tons of his videos, read his books. I know you've had him on as a guest before, and that really caught my attention.
He was my partner for 2 years, so I not only had him on, we were very close.
Really? Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, so the work that he does has really inspired a lot of like how I see, I guess at like the really high level of like, cool, what ecosystem, what biome, what plant and animal communities naturally occurred on the site where you are. Cool, model these productive, edible, economic, model those ecosystems off of what the native ecology was. And so that idea really, really struck a chord with me. Yeah, and it just felt like it unlocked something, and then reading his book was just super valuable. So he's definitely been one of the big influential people that's kind of like steered this journey in a certain kind of way for me.
So do you follow the principle of stun? Does that mean anything to you? Have you heard Mark use that term? Stun is
absolutely
strikingly terrific utter neglect, which means that you can have an ecosystem that you're in somehow managing that can be managed with stun. You've done the right thing. And
yeah, I think I've heard it as sheer total utter neglect, because like I don't want to have to baby plants, I don't want to have to like coddle things. If it's gonna want to die, cool, see you later. I don't want your genetics. I want things that are hardy and can withstand the climate and the local ecosystem and just whatever condition. I don't want to sign myself up for all this work.
So tell us, that's a great transition. We've been seeing lots of really amazing images in the background and some videos as we've been talking here. Tell us what you've done on the place you're now living, and maybe you can even direct Mark to a particular set of locations on your Instagram page or whatever to maybe show. I hope you took some images of before and after of some things that you've done, so that you can in the future use that.
Yeah, it's interesting. In a lot of ways, it feels like I have like only just barely gotten started, because we've only been here for 2 years, and in the scheme of things, that's like no time at all. What it is though, 2 years is enough time to kind of like get my feet into the ground and feel like I have an understanding of where I'm going, what's kind of happening on the landscape. Yeah, I think actually one of the other pictures that was up on the Facebook page of like the drone footage with the mountain in the background could be a good one to kind of help describe a little bit about what's happening. Because it's an interesting property. It's long and skinny, and it's on two sides bordered by some pretty opposite elements. One of them being a big road, right? There's a highway that borders one edge of it. And then on the other edge of the property is a stream. It's a riparian area. And so I guess in my mind, what's happening is, to me, it's almost like a place to learn. It's a place for me to learn, experiment, and really cut my teeth. Because if I'm imagining myself, if this is going to be a 40, 50, 60-year thing for me, that I'm like interested in pursuing this kind of stuff, to me, this is like just the place to really make as much learning happen here as I can, right? I want to cut my teeth. I want to try things. I want to experiment, and I want to push what's possible. And I guess in the end, I kind of, not in the end because there is no end, but I guess over time I see this becoming more and more of a demonstration site, right? An education site. How do you turn an orchard or just a degraded ecosystem into something lush, productive, beautiful, ecologically resilient, productive, right? How do you do those things? And so what's happened is, and obviously my thoughts on what's happening here at the property have changed over the last 2 years, but the pattern, I think, roughly is that it's becoming a demonstration site, right? Whether that's permaculture or agroforestry, I'm not going to put a specific label on it because then it excludes other potentials, but it's becoming a place that, yeah, can show what's possible in a landscape.
As you
with
look
this
at
climate.
the ecological history of where you're at, going back before humans started to impact it, what would it have looked like?
Yeah, great question. Basically, it's a really unique kind of ecosystem. It's a temperate rainforest. And so we're just about 1 kilometer away from a really big river. And so it's a lowland temperate rainforest. It's floodplain, very flat. There would have been swamps here historically, but as humans do, we scratch little marks into the surface of the earth and drain the water away, and then wonder why we have droughts and whatnot. But yeah, historically this was a lowland temperate rainforest, and so part of what I'm doing is trying to recreate that ecosystem with edible, productive medicine, timber, fuel, fiber, those really useful species, those useful plants, and create a living ecosystem here where maybe when we arrived 2 years ago, and it still is to an extent becoming something different, but it's not much of an ecosystem that is supporting humans. Because when you think about the beautiful growing climate we have here, the rich, fertile soil of the floodplains, how much potential there is to really be resilient and not being reliant on these huge, massive systems, right? We can grow so much food here. We can grow so much beautiful timber here. We can provide for so much for ourselves and for wildlife and to the community. Where before, when we first moved here, it was literally just like grass and trees, very much classic orchard, right? And so I guess part of what the motivation is to explore that edge of what's possible. Part of it's also riparian restoration, repairing these waterways, because New Zealand is full of waterways that are just right up against cows, right? Like pasture for cows, and then there's about 1 meter, and then you have a waterway, and then we wonder why the ecology of these streams, and there's so much potential, right? There's so much potential, and so when you can organize these beautiful ecosystems in a way that helps restore the environment, makes these living ecosystems more interesting to work in. First of all, it's a diverse thing, it's beautiful, it's aesthetically pleasing, and there's a diversity of things that keep it interesting, and it's economically productive. There's just so much potential there, and it's cool. Just scratching the surface of seeing how that can happen. That's exciting to me. So that's part of what this journey is, exploring that.
Awesome. What would have been the historic keystone species in the area? Do you know?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I'm still new to New Zealand, and so my understanding of native New Zealand ecology is so different to what I come from in the States, where your keystone species are things like deer, elk, coyotes, not coyotes, wolves, those very characteristic things. Whereas here, there were no mammals. It was just tons and tons of birds. The bird life was just absolutely crazy. There was big 12-foot birds that couldn't fly, but they looked like dinosaurs. They're called the moa. So it's just such a different ecology that it's almost hard for me to know like, oh, this was a keystone species and this wasn't. And then because, you know, over the last 1,000 years, so many of those have either A, gone extinct or are no longer present in the landscape because it's orchard after orchard after orchard after orchard after, you know, dairy farm after dairy farm after dairy farm. So it's hard to, at least for me, with my knowledge of just local ecology, to have a really clear idea of this is a keystone species and this is, but on a plant level, basically there were massive trees that created these beautiful, like native bush isn't uncommon to, you know, it's kind of all around dotted around landscapes, and it's just a really beautiful thing to be inside of, and just at every level of the forest, it just feels so lush and inviting, and it's part of it is just recreating that feeling, whether it's with native species or edibles or a mix of the two. It's just recreating that feeling of like feeling nestled within an ecosystem that you're in touch with. Yeah. So
What would
I don't know if that
be
answered your
some of the most annoying invasives that you end up dealing with as you're starting to put your own footprint on that property?
It's such a funny question that you asked. I love that because like you're familiar with Mark Shepard and his ideas on what's an invasive species and what's not. And the plant right there that we're looking at, that's a Mexican sunflower. It's definitely exotic and it definitely has potential to be a really bad invasive species. And the interesting thing is that about invasives is we demonize certain plants because we don't perceive them as good, whatever that means, or we perceive them as destructive. But I think part of what that is, or part of what it maybe requires, is just a little bit of like ecological literacy, a little bit of education around the plant to understand that, oh, maybe it's not like generically bad, but oh, it's doing something, it's providing a service to the ecosystem, otherwise it wouldn't be doing it, right? All plants contribute towards ecological succession in some way or another, whether it's lichen on a fence post that's slowly, you know, creating this rudimentary soil, or whether it's a Mexican sunflower or a weedy dandelion. Like there's so many different plants that have a bad reputation for no other reason other than we have these preconceived notions of how things maybe should be, right? And so there's a few invasive species, there's a few really weedy species that are basically the ones that thrive on stun, sheer total utter neglect, the ones that you can just chuck in and they'll grow vigorously, they'll do a great job at it. And part of what I actually do is I utilize that, I harness that, because what that's doing is it propels succession forward. And there's this beautiful story of a man on the Banks Peninsula down on the South Island. And basically the story is he turned this degraded, you know, massive acreage of degraded landscape back into native forest, all by being hands off, right? Gorse is a huge pest problem here, not pest problem, but like it's a really bad weed for a lot of farmers. And people hate it. It's spiky. It's a nuisance thing. So it gets sprayed all the time. It gets cut down. But what it does is gorse is a really great nursery species, right? It allows native seeds to populate below and emerge through, and eventually basically turning old degraded pasture into a native forest. And so what this man did on the Banks Peninsula is he basically fast forwarded 40 years of like being hands off, letting the gorse grow. His neighbors hated him. Well, now 40 years, it's just beautiful bush. It's native and just totally hands off. There was no huge, massive efforts. Like it was very much hands off. And so what it feels like is possible, and it is because there's some examples of this happening around, you know, especially New Zealand and outside, especially in South America, is with syntropic agroforestry is one of the things that I've been learning a lot about recently, is harnessing the abilities of these plants, in particular, like the ones that are very quick to establish. These ones get put on massive growth very quickly, the weedy species, harnessing those to pull succession forward and create these beautiful edible ecosystems faster than, oh, just kick back and wait 40 years and then it'll appear. because you can create a beautiful edible ecosystem in 10 years, like it feels like you're in this amazing, jungle that's dripping with fruit. You can create that very quickly when you're working with succession. And so part of the species that I'm using are those weedy species because it advances succession really quickly. It's in a managed system, so you're not just like, crazily spreading weeds around, but you're using the plant for what it does. And that is advancing succession into these ecosystems that are mature, providing those fruits, whether it's timber, this or that. So yeah, I have an interesting relationship with like invasive species because who was it? I watched this video recently. I think it was maybe one of Jeff Lawton's about what it really means, like what's the real issue with invasive species. And the punchline was that there aren't like invasive species. After, there's something to be said about native local ecology, but at the end of the day, you can't undo what's kind of been done. And so going forward, it's like, how do we create these ecosystems that are valuable to the planet and people, utilizing the tools that we have available to us? And so that's part of what I see we're doing here is using tools to create these ecosystems that are functional for the planet and communities.
You talked about goals for your place to be a demonstration location for teaching, and I know that's part of your goal as a consultant and using the skills you're learning and that you're growing. Let's go out 5 years, and then maybe let's go out 15 years and tell us not so much on the education side, but truly in the nature we've talked about right now about invasives and everything else. What do you think your property is going to look like?
Oh man,
Will you
it's
get
an
any
exciting.
of that? Can you get any of the large trees back that you get in the outback areas now? Or would you have to have neighbors? Would you have to have neighbors do different things? Would you have to impact properties around you more than?
Do you mean to create that like oasis where?
Yeah.
Are you talking about birds bringing other native and like self-seeding? No, I don't think that we'd have to be, doing things externally. I think if you create some kind of hub and a reason for animals and birds to come into the ecosystem, they will. If you build it, they'll show up. And you see examples of that already happening. There are birds that, because the riparian, the creek, is already a great wildlife corridor, whether, invasive animals or natives, right? They use that as a corridor. And so there are native presence here pretty strongly. And so just leaning further into that, I think it'll just propel even further. And I think fast forwarding 5, 10 years, 20 years into the future at this particular property, it's going to look very different. So I'm excited to have all these before photos to see, hey, this actually went from like a very structured looking orchard into this beautiful, diverse, very textured, multi-layered, forest of food that provides for humans, wildlife, etc.
What is there that's edible that you can see is there because of stun, not necessarily that you've brought in. I saw pineapples that we saw in a few other pictures, and I heard you talk about maize and other things. What could you forage and essentially have edible vegetation?
One of the easiest ones that I've been thinking a lot about recently is Cape gooseberry. Cape gooseberries self-seed, and they get flown around by birds like crazy. Like they'll just pop up pretty much anywhere. And they're really delicious. And they're also one of those really great early succession pioneer species. They create a really, they cover the soil, they put on a bunch of biomass, they're edible, they feed the wildlife. They're one of those species that I've been thinking just a lot about recently of like, it looks kind of like a weed, but it's like amazingly edible. Birds love it, covers the soil, beautiful amounts of biomass, and it can be a nursery provides a nursery canopy for younger tree seedlings. Like if you have those more long-lived fruit trees, they'll super happily stay below the canopy of that Cape gooseberry.
What are some of your pests on an animal side, whether they be insects or rodents or you name it?
Yeah, the second one, rodents. It's not a huge pressure, but it's funny that you mentioned that, just because literally yesterday evening I went out to go just collect some food, and I noticed in one of the areas that I'd planted with corn, there was only like maybe 20 left, but every single one the night before had been knocked over and eaten by rats. So rats are a definite problem. So are possums. Those are probably the two big ones for New Zealand: rats and possums and stoats. But beyond that, so many, like, New Zealand is so isolated that we don't have like massive pest problems like other countries might, or like we might if biosecurity kind of like became a bit more slack, or if something happened. So in a lot of ways, we're really lucky, but there's also, there is pressure from rodents.
How about human annoyances? Do you have the equivalent of mosquitoes or no-see-ums or gnats or other sorts of things that are, again, annoying?
Yeah, we've got mosquitoes. We've got, I wasn't familiar with them before. They're called sand flies, because we didn't have them over in Oregon. But they're worse than mosquitoes. They're like little black things, and yeah, they just bite a little bit stronger.
So how has the human side of this gone for you? I see lots of other people, and the others looks like you must be a pretty gregarious guy. How have you settled into the community, and what are you doing to increase your influence in that way?
Well, do you know what's really interesting? I've been thinking about this over the last few days, of like what you just said, of like influence, and also just think, like, looking at a whole, what's happened over the last 3 years for me, moving to a new country, not knowing anybody, and now fast forward 3 years, and I feel like I have this really amazing, like, supportive community of people who are passionate about what I'm passionate about, who seem to give a shit, and it's all because I've just been like willing to share what I'm doing. Like if I had just been doing the exact same stuff, all the same stuff, but just not share any of it, things would be so different, because I wouldn't have began finding and building a community of people around me, like locally and in the wider country. I wouldn't feel like I have that support from a community where, like, oh, if I say, like, I could really use some of this particular plant material, 10 other people around me have it, I can go like get some off of. And that's all happened just because I'm like interested and willing to put myself out there. And so it's interesting because I've only recently been like thinking on that, of like, wow, I feel like 3 years is a pretty short period of time to move to a new country and feel like you have this like massive support network. And so I've been really interested in like, cool, just keep leaning into the like sharing what you're interested in, because if you like, I speak on this a lot, but like if you could be doing the coolest thing in the world, but if nobody knows you're doing it, then how much strength does it have behind it compared to what it could if there was a whole community of people who also cared about it, right? So the potential is so high when you're just willing to put it out there, speak what is true to you. And so that's been really enjoyable, of like feeling like I've been like creating this community of people who can gather behind this idea of like, yeah, let's make a better future for New Zealand, for our communities, for the landscapes and ecosystems and the wildlife. Like let's do something about this, because so many people, I host workshops here, and so many people come to the workshops like, yeah, we just like, we give a shit about the future. We want to make cool things happen. We just don't know where to start. And so in a lot of ways, it feels like what this is doing, what Backyard Paradise is kind of doing, is it's like just being a host, like it's just facilitating what's wanting to happen in the community, solely because like I was feeling this urge. Like I wasn't listening to the community 2 years ago. I wasn't listening to the community a year and a half ago and hearing, oh, what do people want? I was like, no, what do I want? What do I want? Like, I had this vision for what can happen. Cool, I'll put that out there. And then other people who want that similar future latch onto it. And then it becomes this powerful thing where it's like, oh, wow, like a sizable chunk of the community gives a shit. They have a vision for what can happen in the future, compelling, cool, then you can action it. Whereas if like I'm trying to action this vision all on my own, that's hard. It doesn't like, it's harder to do those kind of things, but it becomes easy when you feel like there's community behind what you're doing. And so that's been super powerful recently that I've been thinking on, of just like how much power there can be with sharing and storytelling.
Very cool. We have about, and you're a really good storyteller, so you should keep that up. We have about 6 or 7 minutes left. We had a couple of comments early on. I was corrected in my description of, I call it Philomath, and she said as a native Oregoner it should be Philomater, I think. And then another person that asked what you've really done, which was some detail about your property, and that came from Sam. But with the time left, we have a lot of people in our audience out there. Put some questions in, you guys. Throw in some stuff. Byron's just opened it up here, given a lot of info. So put in some questions for him. Mark, can you think of anything that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I see a lot of really cool videos and really short. I see that you also use TikTok. Here's one TikTok video, and that's what my son does. He makes TikTok.
Yeah.
I found that interesting. That's how I know that this logo. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting videos that you've been making. Really cool. Keep it up.
Yeah, thanks, man. Just the organic reach on TikTok is absolutely crazy. So many people can see a video just, by chance. Whereas on other platforms like Instagram and Facebook, it just doesn't have as many eyeballs. So just getting the stuff out there. Yeah.
So the people are talking, Byron. I've got 2 amazing questions for you. It's interesting. Our GoToWebinar is doing some funny stuff. It's taking everybody's first name and putting it twice. Have you noticed that, Mark? Look at what it's done with our attendees. And now the questions. I have questions from Sam, and Pamela, and Jess. Anyway, this is from Jess, and she says, what advice do you have for setting up a food forest on poor soils? We didn't talk about your soil quality, but my guess is it was somewhat degraded when you started there. So again, her question, what advice for setting up a food forest on poor soil?
Yep, cool. Basically, the idea is that the more poor your soil is when you're starting out, the more support plants you're doing, the more accumulation you're doing of organic matter, basically, is what you need. So you're planting things rather than just like plunking a bunch of fruit trees in that are going to be really wanting those like more rich organic soils. Initially, in that first stage, you're planting things that create that soil. You're planting things that you'll be chopping and dropping the organic matter down, but also the roots are going to be decomposing as you're doing that to build soil both from the top and the bottom. And so it depends on the climate that you're in, what plants are going to suit that. But to be honest, it's a lot of those like really weedy species, like comfrey is one of them, Mexican sunflower, tree lucerne or Ortega brush wattle, lupins, a whole lupin family, like all these nitrogen fixers basically is a huge category of like those support plants. Even eucalyptus, I use eucalyptus purely as chop and drop because they produce so much biomass and they really just begin creating that soil with the organic matter. So basically that's the answer, is like you need to just create organic matter, and then over time you'll be introducing more and more of those fruit trees. But how heavy you lean into that depends on like actually how poor your soils are. Like if it's sand, then you're going to be leaning pretty heavily into that. You're going to be growing things, if you can get away with it, bananas in the climate, to just create more and more of that organic matter. Bananas are a great source of just massive amounts of biomass. But it's all climate dependent, so my recommendations might not suit that particular climate, but heavy on the support plants for poor soils.
So Sam asked, what have you learned about synoptic agroforestry, and why was that your choice of approach?
Yeah, I'm gonna guess it either says syntropic or it's meant to say syntropic.
Yeah, it was misspelled. It should have been syntropic, I think. But
yeah, syntropic. Basically, learning what syntropic agroforestry is, basically it's a way of accelerating that ecosystem development in a way that basically you're harnessing the engine of the earth. The engine of the earth runs on succession, ecological succession. And so it's like applying our own values, whether it's food, timber, medicine, all those things to create a food forest, putting those plants, having them ride the backbone, the engine of succession. And I landed on it because it feels like one of the best approaches right now, one of the best strategies we have for converting these degraded landscapes into these really lush, thriving ecologies. And there's a number of examples of that happening in both subtropical but also temperate climates. Some here in New Zealand even. There's a really great example up in Northland called Permadynamics. And the man who's kind of done that has been spending 15, almost 16 years turning this very degraded slope of grass into this like abundant, lush food forest. And so it's very easy to see the practical of like, oh, cool, that's actually how it works. It's just really compelling, and there's so much to learn about it. It's a very new field since like the 80s, but there's so much evidence for it that it's almost hard to deny its practicality and how well it works. So that's kind of becoming the main strategy that we're working with here, of just like cranking out the organic material, utilizing succession to create these abundant ecosystems.
Awesome. Here's a really good one. It's usually one that I will ask, so I love it that it's coming from somebody else. What's the biggest mistake that you've made so far in your journey through planning? And he says planting, but I think actually in your planning process, and also your operation then from that planning. Do you have one that stands out that you can share?
I do. Yeah, it's a great story too, because basically when we first moved here, the orchard was full of gaps. Like a lot of trees had died, so there was like holes. There was missing places where it was like, oh, a tree used to be there and there and there. And I had these big intentions of like, when we first moved here, I had this great vision of like, oh, turning it into this food forest, this beautiful edible oasis. So that translated to, oh, cool, got to go fill those holes with plants. Did that, spent about, a lot of money to go buy plants to fill all those holes. Good intentions, good vision, poor execution, because like they were just so dispersed, and they were all on their own. They just got dominated by the grass, the weeds. Very few of the trees are healthy. And so the switch that I've made of planting, basically tackling smaller areas, manageable bite-sized chunks to get established, planting things really densely in communities of plants to support each other rather than dispersing my efforts. And so that's really the punchline, is don't disperse yourself, don't spread yourself too thin. You're better off consolidating your efforts into a really, really meaningful place, learning, making your mistakes there, and then moving forward, rather than dispersing your efforts and then succumbing to whatever troubles will happen, because we'll make mistakes and things will happen. Better make those mistakes in a bite-sized package and then move on.
That is such a great answer, and it leads right into Denisha's question, because I think you just answered it. But are there any permaculture applications for someone working with a very small area? And that's just what you talked about. So, talk about truly backyard permaculture. 10 by 10 area, 10, very small.
Oh, I like talking about even smaller. I like talking about like 1 meter by 1 meter, because most
Okay.
people think, oh, you need to plant, if you're planting fruit trees and everything, you need to plant things like 5 meters apart, because then they're going to grow really big and then they're going to be full size. But planting things densely is how nature plants things. Nature tries to cover the soil. Nature has diversity. Nature has things growing in the same patch that are going to live for this long, and also things that are going to live for this long and be this tall and this tall. And so creating those diverse ecosystems that are diverse in time, but also in space, you can fit so much into a square block when you kind of begin experimenting with that. For example, if you had a vegetable garden, right, and you just grew all your regular vegetables there, but then you also included your things like your fruit trees, like maybe you include an avocado or a macadamia or a tamarillo or a sugarcane or a banana, you'll still, because those trees, those big fruit trees are still small in the short term, you still have enough light. There's not the competition between the vegetables and the fruit tree. And then over time, just like in nature, the fruit tree or the big mature tree becomes big and it shades other things out and other things grow in the understory. So basically it's about utilizing the sunlight, harnessing as much photosynthesis as you can rather than planting a tree, cool. Then you have 10 meters of grass, plant the tree. Working really densely in a small square meterage, you learn so much about what conditions plants want and how much you can actually get away with. So I would absolutely advocate, like, just try it in like a single, like 1 by 1 or 1 or 2 by 2 square meter, and just like seeing how much you can really get in there. You learn so much. It's really incredible just in the first year.
Awesome. Well, we are a little past the top of the hour, and I want to be very conscious of your time frame. I don't see any more questions yet. I'll let you guys type some questions for the next 30 seconds or so. I have hundreds of them. I'm going to already ask this. Would you be willing to come back and do this with us again? You've been awesome. And I don't mean like in the next really near future, but I'd love to just chat with you about coming back and maybe even doing a 2 or 3 week series for us and pick a particular topic that maybe the audience can weigh in on and help us with. But just be thinking about that. You don't need to commit or anything right now, but I think
I would love
our
to.
audience is loving you, and it'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I would.
By the way, you're going to get now access to over 100 weeks of unique content from Mark Shepard as a gift from us.
Really?
And so if you like Mark Shepard, you'll get more of him than you can imagine. And it's all unique. It's not just something that he's done, at conferences all over the world and speaking engagements. His book about water that he just recently finished, a lot of it was done by the episodes that he did for us in advance of writing the book. A lot of the preparation. And it's not just him speaking. So he's not just in an office. Mark does 4 or 5 hours of preparation for every hour of actual presentation he does. And he prepares videos from wherever he's at in the world. And he probably has talked from, 20 places when he was out doing this 100 weeks that he did. So anyway, that's going to be yours to have. Well, we do have a couple more questions here. Let's see. I missed the beginning. This is Jeffrey of the session. But what brought your family to New Zealand? And you did give that. You didn't actually really say that. What motivated your parents to go to New Zealand? So yeah, that you didn't touch on that.
Yeah, it wasn't even just them. It was really kind of like a conversation that we all had around. We'd been here before, we loved it, but we were just kind of like wanting to, just like the pursuit of adventure. Really, it sounds kind of corny, but like just pursuing something exciting and some kind of big adventure.
Cool.
Yeah.
And have your parents bought into your permaculture enough so that they're doing things with you? Are they out in the space with you ever?
They're not out in the food forest with me, but they're super supportive of the stuff that I'm doing. Yeah, they love that I've kind of like taken this and ran with it almost. And I think they're just excited to see me like be sinking my teeth into something that is meaningful.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll stop there. That was the last of the questions. You guys were awesome. As you heard, I'm going to be trying to convince Byron to come on with us again and maybe do a couple weeks or even a little more with us if he chooses to. We sure appreciate all of you. I'm going to say something that I haven't said to very many of our 1,000+ speakers we've had over 5 years. We're coming up on our 5th anniversary in a month from tomorrow. And that is, you went out and marketed through your Instagram page. And I don't know how many of the people that are here came from that, but if you did, applause for you for doing that marketing, but also for all of you that came just because you saw what Byron was doing. You'll get the list of everybody and where they came in from, Byron, from it, so you can communicate with them. Why don't we end with this? Tell everybody what the best way to get a hold of you might be. We'll actually have all of the Q&A on replay. This will be up as a replay in about 48 hours, if not sooner. And you can get other people to come, or you can come back and watch it yourself. But give us a little bit about how we get in touch with you. And Mark's usually putting some stuff up. So.
Yeah, best way is just reach out through Instagram. But I want to mention something that you said about the marketing with Instagram, and I love that you phrased it that way, because I hate marketing, but I love what I'm doing is I'm just really trying to give value to people. I'm just trying to give as much. I'm making mistakes, I'm sharing them, I'm sharing ideas as I'm learning. My big thing is like giving as much value as I can to people, whether it's people who are like seasoned and like super already interested, or people who are just like, I just want to be sharing and giving as much value. And I'm appreciative of everybody who's come here and taken the time out of their day to show up on this webinar. Yeah, mad appreciation for everybody who's following along and supports the stuff that we're doing. So yeah, and thanks to you, Wayne, for kind of like organizing and coordinating this. I've been really enjoying myself, so I can't wait to come on at another stage.
Awesome. And for everybody out there, we have William Cobb, who's been with us one time before and coming back on with us tomorrow. We have every week we have more and more new speakers, so I'm not just going to give anybody specific, and then there's replays, so come in. Everything's free if it's live. We keep replays up for at least 7 to 10 days, and those will be free also. So please take advantage of that. Byron, you have an amazing rest of your day. And again, I hope I can get over there to visit. We have lots of New Zealand members, and there's probably some of them on here with us here today. I know Kate Radloff is a big fan of anybody that comes on, so she'll probably reach out to you, and she's on the South Island, but still not that far away. And thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne, really.
Right. So everybody, thanks for watching the replay. Tomorrow we'll have Elaine Ingham. That'll be another amazing replay. So come back for that. Everybody.